Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to this stately Vaughan Manor, where it's another thrilling video in my 100 Favorite Books project. My 100 Favorite Books project, I made a list of my 100 favorite books. I made a video about it, I'll link it down below, because you don't want to miss any of my exciting videos. Oh no. Basically, what I'm doing with this project is I'm trying to find the best editions of my 100 favorite books, at least the best editions for me. They're not always the most fancy pants editions of these books, but very often they're pretty fancy pants. And today we're talking about a pretty great book. We're talking about The Complete Tales and Poems of Edgar Allan Poe. The Complete Tales and Poems of Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe, who was born in 1809 and died in 1849. So he didn't live very long. He died October 7th, so only a few days away from the anniversary of his death. And being October, this is the perfect time to talk about this book. Edgar Allan Poe, who was a pioneer in the writing of short stories, was also one of the greatest horror writers of all time. Certainly one of the most influential horror writers of all time, if not the most influential horror writers of all time. Certainly H.P. Lovecraft considered Edgar Allan Poe to be the greatest horror writer. But he was also a pioneer in other fields, detective fiction and science fiction, and he was a great poet as well. He became famous because of his poem, The Raven, which right around Halloween you will find many booktubers giving their own versions of The Raven. Every year this happens, and it'll surely happen again this year. The Complete Tales and Poems of Edgar Allan Poe. So this is a great book, and it's interesting because if you read everything from Poe, and that's the way I do it usually. When I revisit Poe, usually this is how I revisit Poe. I read all of his poems, I read all of his stories. And it's always an interesting and instructive experience because he wrote so many different things. He wrote humorous stories. I don't think his humorous stories always hold up, although they do have their defenders. A lot of his stories are a little obscure now, but most of his stories hold up really, really well and are just as terrifying and disturbing and creepy as they were when he wrote them. They have an edge, these stories do. And they haven't lost that edge through Edgar Allan Poe being so famous and there being school editions of Edgar Allan Poe for kids and things like that. I remember I read one of those when I was a kid and I was like, man, this is creepy stuff. Certainly, his most famous works are just fantastic. If you were to get a smaller edition, a paperback edition of a collection of his stories, they usually always have the same stories in them. The Fall of the House of Usher, The Mask of the Red Death, Pit and the Pendulum. They always have the same stories in them. The Black Cat, The Telltale Heart. They're amazing stories, so of course they always do. But he wrote so much, and this has his short novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, which is a great read. It's really strange. Such a strange book. And his poetry is amazing as well. Really great dark poetry. Fantastic stuff. So it is obviously one of my favorite books, and a book too that I return to every few years. I will reread Edgar Allan Poe. I'm about due for another visit with Edgar Allan Poe. But as for the edition that I chose this one, and they were this is one of those books that's printed by everybody. Everybody prints their own version of the complete tales and poems of Edgar Allan Poe, and I have more than one. I have the Library of America edition, which is probably the most complete. But like I said, everybody prints these. And for a nice edition for my shelf, I decided to go with this one. This one was the Barnes & Noble edition from 1992. Although that's not really true, even though it says so in here. It says 1992, but actually, this is from Barnes & Noble's first run of leather-bound classics. I like these older classics, older leather-bound editions, even though they're not really leather-bound, I don't think. But I like these old faux leather-bound editions a lot better than the ones that they have now. They're less gaudy, they're more classy looking, they're constructed better. And this one from the early 90s, while it says that it's from 1992, this one was actually printed probably in 1994. There was a few different versions of this that came out in the early 90s. They all had different covers, but this is the cover I like the most. We've got, I mean, that's just, to me, perfect. It's simple, and yet it's exactly what you want from a cover for this book. And in the back it has the cool raven hanging out. It's classy looking on the spine. I certainly like it better than the editions, like I said, that they make now. Barnes & Noble still has their leather-bound classics series, but they've just gotten gaudier and gaudier over the years. Their Edgar Allan Poe edition is, the current one, the one I've seen most recently, is nicer than a couple of the others that they've had. But this is still my favorite. Of course, I could have gone with the Easton Press edition for a few $100s, but it doesn't look a heck of a lot better. I know it's better constructed, of course. It's probably the best bound edition of Edgar Allan Poe. But the book is the same, and I just really like the look of this. So this is the one I chose over that one. This one is not tremendously expensive if you look for it. I think you could still find this sometimes for around $30. I think the last time I looked for this, it was around that much, $30, $35. I say that, and it's probably more than that, but I really, really like this edition. So this is the one I have. I've got another one up there, but that is to be replaced. I'm actually going to be doing a whole rearrangement of this shelf. It'll make a thrilling video on its own. That'll come out later this week. But for now, the complete tales and poems of Edgar Allan Poe. It's delightfully creepy. And if you've never read Edgar Allan Poe, man, fix that. And if you have read Edgar Allan Poe, but you've never read all of his stuff, think about doing that. I know it's long. It's a long book. But it's tremendously rewarding just to see all of the different things that he did and all the different kinds of stories that he wrote and how effective they are. Edgar Allan Poe, man, he lived a short, mostly unhappy life. He was an author that nowadays we would consider him a problematical author, I'm sure. Who cares? He was a really interesting guy. And he was hardworking, actually. And this shows that. This is great work. And you should read it. Okay, guys, I'll shut up now. I will see you next time.